Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Okay, quick question. How many of you use Febreze? Okay. All right. Not the best-selling product here at Word of Life. All right. Hopefully you've heard of Febreze. It's a fascinating product. Its origins start in Cincinnati, Ohio, Procter & Gamble, that makes pretty much everything in the history of the world, I think. They make Tide and Crest toothpaste and all kinds of stuff. But Procter & Gamble, years ago, had a chemist on their team who was working on this formula that might serve as an odor-removing formula. And as he worked on this over a very long period of time, it was like everything else that's being invented. You feel like you're making progress, and then you're going backward. Then you feel like you're moving forward, then you're going backwards. But what's interesting about this particular chemist is that he was a heavy smoker, and one day he went home, and his wife asked him if he had stopped smoking. And he said, "No, why do you ask?" And she said, "Well, I haven't been able to pick up the scent of smoke on you." And so he knew that he was close, or that he'd had this compound that he'd been working on. And sure enough, he did. And so he, of course, finished the product that you and I know as Febreze. And the executives at Procter & Gamble were thrilled. I mean, they had dollar signs in their eyes. Imagine an odor-eliminating product that when you spray it on anything, it would remove the odor. Imagine those of us who raise teenage boys being able to go into their bedrooms and just spray the Febreze, that would be a huge win. So, of course, the executives at Procter & Gamble are like, this is a no-brainer. We have an amazing product here that's just going to fly off the shelves because we all have a need for an odor-eliminating product like that to some extent. And so they worked Febreze through their marketing team. They did what they always did back then. They sent out test bottles to different people in different cities, and they discovered that no one was using it. No one was asking for more of it. And the data they were getting back from these test markets was that the product seemed to have no use. And so they were shocked and stunned, and they worked on it further. Same results. So you've got this seemingly amazing product that should sell itself, but it's not gaining traction. So they actually removed their own internal marketing team from the project. They hired an expert in the United States, an MIT graduate, put together kind of an all-star marketing team. They try it again. They send out test bottles. They go through the whole process, and the same problem keeps happening. And no one can figure it out. Now, true story, on one particular occasion, the marketing team flew out to Phoenix, Arizona to meet with some people that they had asked to use the product. They went to a particular home just outside of Phoenix to a lady who lived there by herself in her home, and she owned 9 cats. Now, I think I can make a biblical case that cats are a result of the fall, okay? I'm pretty sure cats are post-fall, but we can talk about that some other time, okay? My apologies to cat lovers. I know Jesus is the Lion of Judah. I know where we're all going with that, okay? I'm just teasing. But true story, she had 9 cats, and she did not take very good care of the cats, apparently, because when some members of the marketing team walked up on the porch of her home, the smell of all of these cats was so profound, when they walked into the home, they began to gag. And so they walk in this home with this overwhelming smell of all of these cats and litter boxes and whatever else was in there, and they were just like, wow, getting headaches and gagging and everything else. And they sat down with this lady, and they asked about the product that they had sent to her that you and I know is Febreze. She said, "Oh, yeah, I have it." She went into the closet. She brought out the bottle. It was almost completely full. Now, the marketing team was just blown away. How in the world is this lady not using the product? Because she is exhibit A as to the people in the world who need to use the product. And when they began to ask her, "Well, ma'am, why have you not used it and provided any feedback on it?" And she said something to them that changed the course of the product itself. She said, "I haven't seen a need for it." And the light bulb went off for the lead marketer. And what he discovered is something that's true of human nature, that whenever you are immersed in a certain environment for a prolonged period of time, even the most acute aspects of that environment are lost on you. That's why, by the way, you can fall asleep with the television at a loud volume, which some of you probably did last night, which I have done on occasion, because your brain eventually will tune out whatever is constant. You can fall asleep with the TV on low volume, no volume. You can fall asleep with the TV on high volume. Eventually, you're going to drown it out. It all becomes white noise. And if you're in a certain environment for a prolonged period of time, even the most profound aspects of that environment are lost on you. So this woman living with 9 cats, because she lived with 9 cats, because she was accustomed to the smells, because she was accustomed to the litter boxes, because she was accustomed to the way she lived, did not know that when she received a bottle of an odor-eliminating product that there was any odor to eliminate. It took somebody from the outside to come in to say, no, you desperately need this product. But she wasn't convinced. So here's how Febreze became Febreze. The marketing team went back to the executives in Procter & Gamble and said, we're marketing the product all wrong. We're marketing it as an odor-eliminating product to people that don't know they live in the odors. And so they originally marketed Febreze as an after-cleaning product. You spray it after you vacuum. You spray it after you clean. You spray it in your car. And they added the scents and all the things that they're accustomed to it now. And eventually, after the product took hold, they began to really push the odor-eliminating benefits of it, which is more or less how it's known today. But it nearly never made it to market. Because whenever you're immersed in for a prolonged period of time in a certain environment, it doesn't matter even how acute some of the dynamics of that environment can be. They will be lost on you. Now, that's even true of the church. It's true in our walks with God. It's true in our journey through His Word. It's true when we sing and worship sometimes. You know, whatever is normal to us, constant for us, steady for us, routine for us, can lose the profundity over time. That's why, by the way, we send students to camp. It gets them out of the normal routine. It gets them out of the normal worship setting, the normal teaching setting. It forces them to put away their phones, and for 5 days or so in the summer, they have just a certain environment that is new and fresh and different. And even though we're doing all the same things in terms of preaching and teaching and worship, there are different activities and fun and different speakers and instrumentalists and so forth. And that 5 days away from the norm kind of puts students in an environment where maybe they'll hear something that they could hear, by the way, on Sunday morning at their home church, but they wouldn't receive it maybe quite the same. Because it's the same gospel, is it not? You know? And so for those of us who handle the Word of God every day, you know, it's every day. Or we go to the same church. We go to the same church for X amount of years. Or listening to the same pastor. Or worshiping with the same instrumentalist. Or whatever the case may be. Anything can become routine if you engage in it on a regular basis. I have a good friend who lives in Columbus, Ohio. He's a season ticket holder at the greatest professional sports team in the state of Ohio. That's the Ohio State Buckeye college football team. Pretty sure we've been paying athletes long before the NIL days. Okay, anyway. And it's funny because when I take my kids to a game, of course, we don't get to go very often. We go to this thing called the Skull Session before with the band, and we're there for the walk, for the players, and man, we take in the whole day. My friend shows up about 5 minutes before kickoff. I'm like, are you going to the Skull Session? He hadn't been in the Skull Session in probably 15 years. You know why? He's at every game. And he loves it. It's fine, but it's not like when I go, because I don't get to go very often anymore. And when I go with my kids, man, we're all in, and we go to everything, and we're getting the souvenir cups. I'm paying $5 more for the Coca-Cola so I can get the souvenir cup, you know. And so this is just human nature, right? It's just human nature. Okay, so So today we're going to talk about King David. We're looking at these mountaintop moments and some of our heroes. Now, King David, it might be just the highest peak, so to speak, when it comes to some of our heroes and when it comes to this redemptive history that culminates in Jesus. Because, can I tell you the most amazing thing about David? David never grew tired or weary in his relationship with God. His walk with God never grew stale. He somehow avoided this normal pitfall of, well, you know, I've been walking with God X amount of years and it's just kind of routine or whatever. Where a lot of people today would say in certain areas of their lives, I just don't see the need for it. David never really had that perspective when it came to his relationship with his God. And that's an amazing, amazing reality. Now, I know he had failures, okay? We all know that. We know he wasn't perfect. I'll highlight a little bit of that today. But what was true of David that's not been said of anybody else in human history was that he is a man who followed after God his entire life. In fact, Acts 13, this is when the Apostle Paul is recounting some history in Israel. This is what Paul said about what God said. Paul said, God removed King Saul and replaced him with David, a man about whom God himself said, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do everything I ask him to do. Now see, that was true of David his entire life. Not perfectly, but persistently. David did not have the Febreze syndrome. He didn't have these lulls in his faith, these lulls in his walk with God. Now, he had moments he failed and moments he sinned, moments he was blinded by his flesh, but David on the whole loved God his whole life, pursued God his whole life, was passionate about his relationship with God his whole life. And David serves as an example to us ultimately of one who was after God's own heart, who persistently followed after his God all the days of his life. You know who couldn't say that? His son Solomon. So David is remarkable in this regard. And this is the reason, if you recall, that Samuel was led to David to anoint David the next king over Israel. Do you remember the process? It was kind of like, I don't know, like it'd be almost like a TV show today. Israel's next king. You know, and there's this process, and Samuel's trying to find the next king. Well, what were they looking for? They were looking for the next Saul. What was unique about Saul? Saul was a tall man. He was a strong man. He was imposing. That's the kind of man Samuel was looking for initially. And he had a few men in mind, and God's telling Samuel, nope, not him, not him, not him. And he leads Samuel, God does, to Jesse's boys, and the youngest in this run of the litter, this little guy that I think looked a lot like me when I got married, 6'1", 135 pounds. I could hula hoop with a Cheerio, okay? I do not know why my wife married me. I think pity. It was just sheer pity, okay? And I think David, as a young man, he was not the tallest. He was not the biggest. He was not the strongest. But his heart was inclined toward the Lord. And do you remember what the Lord said to Samuel? People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And he chose David. And what's amazing to me about David is that heart that he had for the Lord as a young man is the same heart he had for the Lord as an old man. Throughout his life, not perfectly, but persistently, David loved the Lord. He never caved into the Febreze syndrome, where everything just kind of became commonplace to him, and he didn't see his need for his walk with the Lord. And so today I want us to think about, when we come to David, what we learn about a man who was after God's own heart and how we might emulate that in our own lives. If you're a note taker, here's the key takeaway today. The key to walking with God is persistence, not perfection. It's persistence. We don't grow weary in well-doing. We don't take certain things for granted. We understand the natures of our own depraved hearts to allow some of the most profound, amazing aspects of our faith journeys to become commonplace to us, and we push back against that. It's just this persistence of walking with the Lord day after day after day, not perfection, persistence. Man, that is what David was all about. And there's some things that surface in his life that are encouraging to me. Okay, first of all, David loved God. Why was he a man after God's own heart? Man, he loved God. I think of Psalm 40. David said, "Oh, the joys of those who trust the Lord, who have no confidence in the proud or in those who worship idols. Oh, Lord, my God, you have performed many wonders for us. Your plans for us are too numerous to list. You have no equal. If I tried to recite all of your wonderful deeds, I would never come to the end of them." How about Psalm 42? "As the deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, my God. I thirst for God, the living God. When can I go and stand before him?" David loved God, and he loved God passionately all the days of his life. The Psalms are filled with songs of David that communicate his deep love for God in good times and in bad times. When he was running for his life, hiding in caves, and when he was the king of Israel. He loved God. And listen to me. Our journey of faith is ultimately not about where we go to church or what songs we sing or what books we read. It's about being in a personal relationship with the God of this universe who made us in his image and who redeemed us by his son. And all the other stuff is good and necessary and helpful and encouraging, but at the end of the day, God has redeemed us for himself. And to love him and to treasure him all the days of our lives is one of the ways we emulate King David. Because David loved God passionately and personally all the days of his life. It's almost like a marriage, and I think that's one of the reasons the church is reflected as the bride of Christ, right? Like, do you remember when you first met your spouse? Well, how's it going today? Well, I remember when I first met my wife, I told you how I met her. It was a little bit of a, awkward negotiation. But of course, I fell in love with her, as they say. And she learned to tolerate me, is kind of how that went down. And I remember it was like, you know what, there's no question in my mind. This is the person God has for me, and I loved her dearly. And so I remember I came up with this really neat way I was going to propose to her. There was this little park. It was fairly big, like nature reserve behind my house where I grew up. And we used to walk back there on Sunday afternoons after church and all that. And we'd go walking around. There's this little pond there. And it was by that pond that we had our very first kiss. And that was before we got married, but she couldn't resist, okay? So you'll just have to forgive her. We had our first kiss there by this little pond. And so I thought, you know what? When I proposed to her, I'm gonna, there's another kind of park entrance there, and I'm going around the park, and I laid out a dozen roses, and the last rose on the path stopped at the exact spot of our first kiss, and then I was gonna propose to her there. But here's the weird part. I wasn't gonna walk her down that path, I was gonna surprise her. And so I had this master plan, and my brother picked her up. She thought she was meeting me with my brother, and he got her to the park, and he lets her out of the car, and right there next to her door is the path of roses, and she follows the path of roses. I know everything sounds good so far. Wait, I'm about to mess it up. Okay, and she follows the path of roses, and she gets to the last rose. It's at the exact spot of our very first kiss, and I had planned, I'm like, okay, then I'm just going to kind of like appear. Okay. You guys, it's like in the woods, okay? So she's there. I'm a nervous wreck. I mean, I am so nervous. And I come out behind the trees, but I'm like flush white. I'm as nervous, and I'm like walking like a robot. And it was like an axe murder coming out of the forest, okay? And in my mind, I'm like, this is going to be so romantic. It was not romantic, okay? And I'll never forget the words she spoke to me in that moment. She looked at me holding the dozen roses, and she goes, "Are you okay?" So, no, I was not okay. I was a nervous wreck. And I just come out of the trees awkwardly, and I get down on one knee, and I'm like, "Will you marry me?" And then she starts crying. She gave me no answer, okay? Can I have an answer? And then we get back to my car. I'd locked my keys in the car because I was so nervous, so... Then I had to call my parents, can you come pick us up? It was just, yeah. Anyway, my point in all of that is I loved her. And you think back on those days, man, those were great days. And the wedding and all that. But, I think we're 27 or 8 years in. I can't remember. It doesn't really matter. Okay, no. No, we are, we're 27 years in. And, what makes marriage work? Well, it helps if you still passionately and personally love the person that you're married to. That is the point of it all, is it not? That kind of is the point, right? And there's a lot of other things that go into a marriage, of course, but the genesis of it is at some point you loved the person and loved the person, right? That's the foundation. Okay, in our relationship with God, this is what I so appreciate about David. It never became about the religious aspects of his faith or the necessary steps to grow or all the... He loved God. And that just stayed with him, that personal, passionate love for God. That's an encouragement. Okay, secondly, his commitment to grow over time. So the first thing we learn about David in his persistent walk with the Lord is that he loved God personally and passionately. And then secondly, he grew over time. He just never kind of threw in the towel or thought he arrived. David, even though he was the king and he was a great man, powerful and all the rest, man, David persistently grew in his faith. I referenced it the other night. We see it in 1 Samuel 17 before Goliath. What does David reference? He references the times in his young life when God had delivered him from adverse circumstances. God had proven himself to David, and he just kept leaning into the Lord. And he kept growing over time, and we've talked about this week, so I won't belabor the point. But listen, God works in our lives today not just to draw us to himself, but to prepare us for what is to come next. The current season is preparatory for the future season, and one of the things I encourage when I'm talking to students or college students is do not become so ambitious that you miss the necessary steps that God has for you in growing your faith. It's going to happen over time. And what he's doing right now is preparatory for what he's going to do in the future. And there's some things you need to learn today that will benefit you in your tomorrow. David just grew in his faith over time, and that is huge. Now, here's the third thing, okay? This is something that a lot of people miss. He owned his sin. So why was David a man after God's own heart? Well, he loved God personally and passionately. I mean, that never went to the second chair, so to speak, for David. He loved God. Secondly, he grew in his faith over time. He continued to grow in his faith. Third, this is important now, he owned his sin. You know what? Our society would be in a totally different place if people would just own their sin. If people just say, yep, you know what, I messed up. That's on me. Why is that so hard for us to say? And I know when we go to David, for people who are new to the Bible, right, they think David's a man after God's own heart. He had some major failures. He did. But you know what he did after each of those failures? He repented, and he went back to his God that he loved, and he owned it, and he apologized, and he asked for God's forgiveness and grace. Amen. And it wasn't the apology that I like to give. Well, God, if you were offended by my actions, then I apologize. Don't you love those apologies? Well, if you were offended, then I'm sorry. Well, what exactly are you sorry about? And when David owned his sin, it wasn't, well, you know what, God, I mean, Bathsheba shouldn't have been up there on the rooftop to begin with or anything. He just owned it. He owned it. And when God sent Nathan to David, and remember Nathan paints this picture of a man, and he's got everything. There's a poor man who's got one little lamb, and the rich man takes the poor man's one little lamb, and David's like, man, that guy ought to be, that guy ought to be absolutely held into account. David said he deserves to die. And remember when Nathan said, you are that man? And David did not exact revenge on Nathan. David didn't lock up Nathan. David did not allow his pride in that moment to get the best of him. David said, you know what? You're right. You know how rare it is for someone in David's powerful position to be confronted and to own it? That is a very unique humility. It's one of the reasons he's a man after God's own heart. So then David said to Samuel, I have sinned against the Lord. Well, you also sinned against Uriah, by the way, because he's dead. And you sinned against Bathsheba, that's right. But it starts with his offense against the Lord, who had been so good to him. And of course, then David writes Psalm 51, where he says, purify me from my sins and I will be clean. Wash me and I will be whiter than snow. Give me back my joy again. You have broken me. Now let me rejoice. Don't keep looking at my sins. Remove the stain of my guilt. And he says this beautiful statement. I know you know this. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. That word create there that David uses is the exact same word used of God's creative activity in Genesis 1. In other words, David says, there's another Hebrew word David could have used there. He doesn't use it. He uses barak, create. That word is only used of God's creative activity. David says, God, I need you to do what only you can do. And you see, he owns it, man. He was crushed by it. He was willing to do whatever was required to make it right. And when David sinned, and we see these moments in his life, he was not perfect, but he was persistent. He owned his sin. And I'll tell you, that is just something, the longer I live, that stays with me. I think one of the most difficult things for me to do as a parent at times, and I've had to do it many times, of course, is to apologize to my children. When I spoke in anger, or I said something in a way I shouldn't have said it, or did something I shouldn't have done, or whatever, because I'm thinking, well, you know what? Your tomfoolery caused it. But I didn't handle it right. And for me to teach my kids, you know what? I've got to own my piece of this. Even what I want to do as their dad is say, but you know what? Had you not been a nincompoop here, Dad would have never gotten so upset or whatever. But you know what? I have to own my own actions, don't I? And it's just these moments in life where you're in the position of power, or you're in the position of authority, or you're in the position where you don't have to give the apology. But you own it. It's harder to do, I think, the older we get and the more influence we have. The amazing thing about David, as the king of Israel and the most powerful man in his region, he never owed anyone anything. But yet when he was in the wrong, he did. He owned it. Remarkable humility. And that's a great model for us. I think a lot of things just in the church world, if we're talking about the church, if people would just say, you know what, that's on me. All right, let's go. And modeling that is so important. So David loved God. He grew in his faith over time. He owned his sin, and here's the last thing. He followed God's will for his life above his own ambition. He followed God's will for his life above his own ambition. Here's a quick example, but powerful. Remember when David was running for his life? David had been anointed king, but he had not yet assumed the throne. Saul is still in charge, and Saul is trying to take David's life. You talk about a man who would not own his sin. That was King Saul. There's the difference in the two men. And so David's fleeing for his life. Remember, on 2 occasions, David has the opportunity to take Saul's life. Do you remember these moments? They're somewhat comical. One is in a cave when Saul goes in to go to the bathroom, and David's hiding in that cave. And David's men are like, here he is. I mean, it kind of looks like to us, David, God brought him in here. Let's go. And David doesn't do it. What does David say? God forbid that I should do this to the Lord the king. I will not attack the Lord's anointed one. And then it happens again when Saul's men are encamped. They're sleeping at night. David's commander goes in, and there Saul lays on the ground. Abishai says, David, let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of this spear. I will not need to hit him twice. Abishai sounds like a pretty bad dude, by the way. When we meet him in the eternal state, I would not recommend you make him mad, okay? He's a pretty bad dude. He said, hey, David, I just need one swipe at the spear, buddy. I won't need two. And David says the same thing, no. For who can remain innocent after attacking the Lord's anointed one? Now, here is what rocks my world. This convicts me and encourages me. Listen to this. It was more important for David to be obedient to his God than it was for him to be the king of Israel. Now just let that sink in a second. Think about all that he waited on to be obedient to God. Running for his life with his men, not yet having assumed the throne. Saul is in the wrong, But yet God had not given David the throne yet. And David valued the will of God for him, even though it meant that he had to wait and run and flee, more than he valued all the trappings and the power of being the king of Israel. I think we can agree that's pretty rare. And one of the reasons God says of him, he's a man after my own heart. He loved God personally, persistently over the course of his life. He never grew dull in his walk with Jesus. He grew in his faith. He kept growing over time. He owned his sin when he messed up, and then he just valued the will of God. He was going to do what God had tasked him to do. I think of what someone said years ago in leadership. If you want to do what I do, you have to do what I did. And I talk about that with young leaders as I have the opportunity to coach and speak to leaders, that, you know what, if you want to start in the church that I'm currently in, you're probably not going to start there. You say, how do I get there? Well, to do what I do, you have to do what I did. David is like that, right? Everybody wants to be the king of Israel. You know what everybody does not want to do? Flee for their lives in caves. And there's this aspect of, do we really treasure and value the will of God? Are we leaning into his timing and his purposes? That's what David did. It was more important for him to be obedient to God than even being the king of Israel. And that's such a good lesson for us. So many who want everything. I think of a lot of young leaders, they want everything right now. Well, the world doesn't work that way. It's never worked that way. What we value is the will of God for us, his timing, his plan, his purpose. I think in our world today, which is so confused, it's the will of God that is best for us, right? That God has made us male and female, and being female matters. It matters. Right? Our society is losing this in certain segments of it. It's like, no, God's design for us is best. His design for marriage is one man and one woman for life. His design for how we steward what he gives to us. His design for friendship and being engaged in the local church. His design for unity and putting together all of these hands and feet and toes and fingers, and he calls them the church. Different people and different personalities and different upbringings. Isn't it beautiful how all these different people can pull together for the same purpose, I tell people who are new to church, now listen, our church is not a perfect church, and we've got a lot of wonderful people. We also have some strange people. Anybody in a church with some strange people? I just tell new people to church, Jesus did not make them weird, okay? He saved them weird. And I'm glad Jesus saves weird people. And we've all got them, right? But the beauty of the church is, what does Jesus talk about? Well, there's some hands and legs and fingers and toes, and we got some pinky toes in our church. I don't even know what they do, but I'm glad they're there. We've got some appendices, and you can lose your appendix and do fine. I don't know. We've got some of those in there, but it's just the beauty of what God does and his will for the church and his will for your life and his will for your family and his will for your finances and his will for your future. It's just David valued what God had for him, God's design, God's plan, God's purpose, and he leaned into that all the days of his life. What an encouragement. And so today, I hope you're encouraged as I am when I think of David. I'm also convicted, right? To love God. Don't miss God in your religious activity. To grow in your faith. God's not done with any of us yet. When you mess up, when I mess up, hey, let's own it. The Lord gives grace to the humble, but resists the proud. And then to lean into God's will for our lives. And to do that from start to finish. Is to emulate the great King David and to not allow even some of the most profound aspects of walking with Jesus to be lost on us. That's the goal. And so let's pray to that end, and then we'll go. So God, thank you for David's example today, this monumental figure of our faith. And Lord, we know he was far from perfect. God, you've been honest about that in your word. He was far from perfect, but oh, Father, how he loved you and how he owned his sin and really strove to live out every season of his life for you and your glory. So help us to do that, God. God, in our areas of influence, Lord, help us to finish well, to never grow weary in well-doing, and to love you today and every day with passion and purpose. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.